welcome to your fourth and final session at this year's Aarhus Symposium. We hope that you had a really great day so far. And now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our moderator for this session, anchor at TV2 Business, Simon Nielsen.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to bother you with whoops, no sound? No? Help me.
Perfect.
I usually have a lot of technicians and producers doing all this stuff. This is actually the second time I'm interviewing Pernille Erenbjerg. I'm not sure that she knows it. I've interviewed her before. Oh, thank you. But usually I'm an anchor at TV2 Business. I'm sitting alone in a studio talking directly into a camera with CEOs or investors or analysts. So I'm really looking forward to do this live session with you, Pernille. You are actually the most powerful businesswoman in Denmark, according to Danish Business Daily Børsen. And let me just run through Pernille's career very quickly. Educated, state-authorized CPA, you told me, accountant. You've been a partner in Deloitte. 2003, you joined TDC and has been in different sort of group functions within the financial departments. And in 2015, a united board in TDC Group looked at the challenges of the largest telecom company in Denmark, what they needed to go through this massive digital transformation in the future in Denmark is, of course, a state-authorized accountant. And here she is, Pernille Erenbjerg. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Now, I don't need to tell all of you that if you're the one in the room that knows about the numbers, that feel comfortable with the numbers, you will take down anyone in a discussion. So, in the spirit of honesty here, I should probably add to the very nice introduction that Simon gave me here and confess to the fact that I'm from Copenhagen. Not only am I born in Copenhagen, I live in Copenhagen, I was educated in Copenhagen, and people within TDC will tell you that it's fairly tough to get me out of Copenhagen. Nevertheless, the reason why I say this is not to talk about myself, it's just to say I'm actually very impressed by a lot of things today. The whole setup is fantastic, the list of speakers is really impressive, but more than anything, the test for everything, and the thing I'm very impressed by right now, is that had I been at my old school in Copenhagen at 5 o'clock on a dark Friday afternoon, after a long day of speeches, I would, and not only a Friday, the day of the Christmas beer, very important. So had I right now been standing in Copenhagen under these same circumstances, I would have very likely been addressing a room with people who were either related to me or whose paycheck I pay. So I'm very impressed that so many of you have stuck around to speak about digital power, and that's what we're going to talk about now. I'll do the slide deck fairly quickly, and then we'll get on to the Q&As, because that's the interesting part, of course. So what is digital power? You've heard about many different types of powers today, but digital power, of course, is the superpower. This is the force that is transforming our societies, transforming the world, that will mean that the life that you will lead, both on a personal level and certainly in a work-related context, will be very, very different from the lives that your parents have led. So you've heard about today, many of you probably, geopolitical powers, industry powers, people powers, all very powerful, but all of these also being hugely transformed these days by digital power or by the tech revolution, whichever name you want to put to it. So what do I mean by that? And just some very few examples here. If we just take a quick look at the geopolitical situation and say, what's going on out there? What I've just shown up here is a reminder of the Arab Spring. You will remember the revolution that swept across much of the Middle East in 2010. And the remarkable thing about that is, first of all, of course, the influence that this still has on us today. Think about Syria, think about the refugees, all of that comes out of this. But very remarkably, this was a revolution in which social media, internet, played a huge role. That was how the whole thing was orchestrated, planned, and conducted. Another example, of course, the Obama 2008 election. We'll see who pulls it off this time, but certainly in 2008, Obama used, again, social media in a way that had not been done before in a US presidential election. Excuse me. The other point I have up here is sort of the backside of this. So cyber espionage. And it is estimated, as you can see up here, that the government-funded espionage going on in cyberspace is depriving the global economy of a very, very substantial amount this year. You've also seen, of course, how Russia allegedly is hacking the mail servers of the Democratic Party in the US and thus trying to influence the outcome of the election. So the fact that states are conducting espionage, including on their own citizens, is not a new thing. But what we're seeing now is stuff that, until a few years ago, belonged in sci-fi films and literature. So huge impact from digital on this part of it. Onto industry, and you've all seen, of course, various versions of this before. What it shows you is the 5 biggest companies in the world in 2001, 2006, 11, and 16. And if we start in 16, the top 5 companies in the world are all tech companies. Think about that. They're all tech companies. And if you look sort of on the snapshots previously, every time in top 5, there has been only one tech company. Now, all top 5 are techs. And some of these companies, Facebook, for instance, are companies that were not around 10 years ago. So that's how forceful this is in terms of shifting the industries globally. And that's how fast it happens, because that's the other point about digitization. It happens very, very fast. In fact, one of the biggest change agents, one of the most disruptive devices ever invented is a smartphone. Something we all have. You have it in your hands, in your pockets, you use it all the time. So do I. 10 years ago, the smartphone didn't exist. Today, in this part of the world, the smartphone penetration, as we call it, is nearly 100%. Everyone has one. And if we look at what that has done to the industry, I've shown some examples up there. Not very many people buy a camera anymore. So that has had a huge impact, obviously, on that industry. Very few people buy separate music devices these days. Huge impact, and so on and so forth. So a lot of examples of how one simple device has changed the industries, and it's happening rapidly. And even within this phenomenon of the smartphone, that's a very good example in and of itself of how quickly it also happens even within the tech companies. So again, the smartphone didn't exist 10 years ago. Up until then, people had been using Nokia phones. We all know what happened to Nokia's mobile business. Then came the BlackBerry. You may be too young to remember the BlackBerry, but up until relatively recently, every executive had a BlackBerry. So it's sort of like a smartphone with a keyboard, and you can't really do a lot of other stuff with that. So allegedly, a few years ago, what happened, and black phones, by the way, were very, very big in the banking and financial industries. You couldn't run into an investment banker who didn't have at least one BlackBerry in his pocket. But allegedly, a few years ago, Jamie Dimon, the chairman of JP Morgan, sent out his annual Christmas card to all of JP Morgan's employees on an iPhone. And when his people saw that, Jamie is using the iPhone, everyone wanted to use the iPhone, even in the banking industry, and REM which is the company that owns BlackBerry, is now sort of a very slim version, let's put it that way, of what it used to be. So even within something that has happened relatively quickly, the renewal cycles are also extremely short. The smartphone also changes the way we interact, the way you act. And I'm wondering if I can get you along on a little experiment here. How many of you would regularly check your phone during the night? Raise your hands. Be honest now. That's while you're supposed to be sleeping and getting ready for the next day. You're checking your phones. How many of you would consider checking your phone and actually checks your phone during dinner? How many of you, when you wake up in the morning, how many of you would check your phone before you kiss your boyfriend or your girlfriend good morning? Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? And it didn't even exist 10 years ago. So what were we all doing 10 years ago? But this is just to sort of exemplify how profoundly, again, digitization is changing industry and the way we behave. I'm going to skip that one and go on to this one to say, even when we talk about people and people power and how we all interact, of course, digitization, and here the examples are the social media platforms, have had a profound impact on people power. And the one I just wanted to highlight here is LinkedIn. A lot less sexy than Facebook, but nevertheless, as you gradually exit this place and enter the workforce and start looking for a job, may already be doing this, you will see that LinkedIn today is used by a lot of companies to do recruiting, also used to sort of figure out who you are once you've replied. One can learn an awful lot by studying profiles on LinkedIn, and companies do this. And I'm sure many of you also have a profile on LinkedIn. So the way you will be interacting with the labor market is hugely influenced by, obviously, digitization. And here I haven't even gotten into the platforms that are out there that people use to sort of offer their services. Companies use them to offer jobs, and we interact over digital platforms. And many of you, in fact, will not work for one particular company. You will be shifting around from company to company using digital platforms to find your next jobs and next tasks. Depending on who you ask, between 30 and 40% of Danish jobs, and that goes for all jobs in the developed world, are in the risk of being made redundant by the forces of digitization, automation, or robotics. This is much more advanced than it used to be. So it used to be the blue-collar worker at the assembly line at risk. This is now very much office personnel, admin personnel, highly educated people like us being replaced by very sophisticated robotics, algorithms, cloud computing force that will surpass what, in some cases at least, what humans can do. Now, not all is lost. A lot of jobs are also being created by digitization. The point here being that things are shifting dramatically in terms of what, as a human being, we will be doing going forward. And many of these jobs up here were unheard of even a few years ago. So app developers, cloud specialists, social media workers, and so on and so forth. So digitization drives growth, creates jobs, but there are also jobs that will become redundant as a consequence of digitization. So what does all of this have to do with TDC? What is digitization, and why am I speaking about digitization? Now, at the core of everything we talk about is connectivity. So Netflix is no fun if the device you're trying to watch it on is not connected to a network, and if that network is not a high-quality network so that you can actually watch what you want to watch. So that's where the telcos of this world come in. And what I have up here behind me is something we've actually spent quite a lot of time on in TDC after I took over, is really finding the core of what TDC is all about. And I'll get back to this a little later, why this is important. But what is the essence? What is the DNA? What would be missing if we were not here. And where we come out is this is all about connecting people. It's also about connecting devices and so on, but it's about bringing people closer, connecting people to their friends, their families, their co-workers, their customers, and connecting to the internet and the world of entertainment that you want to get to. So that's the soul, if you will, the heart of the soul of the place. What I've then showed you here is if this connectivity, why is that so important? And I've touched upon it already. What you can see here is just usage numbers on Netflix and Instagram. And it's just to show you that this is ramping very, very rapidly. So if you, as a user of a network, is going to have a good experience whilst you use these services more and more, that is going to require more and more capacity and more quality in the networks. So all of that leads to, let's skip that one. This could be a global curve, but it is in fact a Danish curve. On the left-hand side here you see, so what is what we've called here the explosion, but how has the data usage in Denmark developed over the last 5 years? And you can see, at least in the latter years, this is exponentially. This is an exponentially growing curve. We are consuming more and more data, both mobile and fixed. And on the right-hand side is the perhaps somewhat surprising consequence for the telecom industry. Our profits are declining. So what is this? People want it more and more, use it more and more, and yet we make less and less of a profit. And had I included up here, so what is the industry investing in these more and more important networks, you would have seen the same development. So what you've seen is actually an industry that has invested less and less, and even though their basic service is used more and more, they're making less and less money. Now that's a crisis if you ever saw one. And of course, one way of participating in this game is to say, fine, we'll just have to do even better at cutting our cost, cutting our investments, preserving whatever cash flow we have, because otherwise we will be fried by our investors. Another way of thinking about it is this, although it's not a spiral, this is a death spiral. So how do you change that game? How do you get yourself out of that situation? And the tricky thing here is, and the point I skipped here is, we don't know what's going to be next. So these are examples of things that popped up, video services on Facebook and Snapchat, and over a 6-month period doubled or tripled their services. So not only do we have ever-increasing needs from the services already out there, there is also a multitude of new stuff popping up all the time, requiring more and more capacity, more and more networks, and we don't really know what's going to happen. So how does one deal with that when confronted with this? Well, one way to think about this is to step back from all the things we don't know and look at the things that we do know. We know that we will see ever-increasing need for speed on the networks, whether they are fixed or mobile. We will see ever-increasing need for capacity. We want coverage everywhere we go. We want it to work perfectly, and so on and so forth. Even if I don't know what the 10 next killer apps are going to be, I'm sure they're going to be there. So for certain, we will need more capacity, we will need more speed, we will need more coverage, and we will need it quickly. The other way, and that's part of what I will now talk to, so what do we do? How does one lead in a situation like this? Point one, focus on what you know and build from there. That at least has been one of our decisions. Another decision and another learning has been that there are things that you just cannot do anymore. So in the old days, a company like TDC, it could have been any other industry company, it could have been a bank. To some extent, I would say it probably still is a bank. The way one would run one's planning processes and run the businesses, you would have a lot of plans, a lot of targets, and a lot of KPIs, and you would do a lot of follow-up. So have you done this? Have you done that? Where are we with this? And there would be this expectation that wherever you were in the organization, your manager, your boss, would have the answers, would make the decisions, would clear the way for you. That's not going to work anymore, right? Because if that is the case with this ever-increasing speed of change, you're not going to be able to keep up as a company. This, I believe, is one of the reasons that big companies are relatively easy prey for small newcomers. Why is it that a shop of 5 or 10 people can actually rock the existence of very big companies? It's partly because of lack of agility in big corporations with very formal and very fixed ways of working. So part of what this is all about, on the left-hand side here, you can see our strategy, which is about this great connectivity. It's about the great products. It's about the great service. Not very surprising. But what is really, really important is the right-hand side here. And that's about, so how do we work? How do we make decisions? How do we move forward? How do we decide whether to do A or B if there are a lot of things we don't know? And by the way, we don't have the time to do a lot of fact-checking and analysis. So what we've come up with is, first of all, we put at the core of everything we do what I showed you before. Why are we here? Because it's important to remember that when you're out there trying to make the right decisions. Why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we keep pushing on? And that's important. Even more important is we have developed a set of behaviors, let's put it that way, things that we think will differentiate us going forward. So I won't, of course, take you through this. This is not a TDC seminar. What I will point to is the one we have down here where we say we take actions and get things done. Another way of saying that is if we see a problem, we fix it. So whereas in the old days, everyone had time, we could do analysis, we could do memos, as was done back then, we could meet, discuss, deliberate, we could go back and we could meet again and so on. And this is the way it happens in a lot of big corporations. That's how it works. But today, what we're saying is, if there is a problem, we fix it. So one example of how we're trying to change the culture and the way we work, and we have to get this right, one example is 18 months ago, when we were taking stock, that's what one does when one is new as a CEO, one takes stock. So where are we? What do we have? What are our immediate problems? And so on. One of the things that kept popping up when I spoke to our own people, when I spoke to our customers, when I spoke, generally speaking, to people also outside of TDC was, we need our fixed infrastructure to deliver more capacity, more speed, and we need it yesterday. You saw the curves. We've done a lot on the mobile side. We have one of the best mobile networks in the world. But on the fixed side, we were not there. And as much as we all love doing stuff mobile, usually when people sit in their homes, they want a good, reliable, high-speed broadband connection. We could deliver that in some areas and in others not. So clearly, that was a problem. We needed to fix it. And when we then spoke to our partners, our suppliers, to say, this is what we want to do, we want to build this great network, can you come help us? They were all very happy to get that call, to take that meeting, but the numbers they came up with in order to do this were just huge. So there was no way we could make a business case out of that. There was no way we could go down that route. So we said, fine, we'll just have to talk to some other potential partners, suppliers. We will have to look to someone who is not as well established on the fixed side, on the cable side as it's called. We'll have to find someone who's more hungry, someone who's willing to co-invest in this, someone who sees this as a showcase. And what we came up with was a company, after a lot of research, we came up with a company that we actually knew very well on the mobile side. It's a Chinese company called Huawei, a huge Chinese company, which is one of the world leaders in network equipment, but primarily for the mobile side. They wanted to make an entry into this market as well. They were looking for the showcase. So we said, fine, we'll do that. We had a lot of interesting discussions with them and so on and so forth. Now, one of the problems with working with Chinese businesses, they're great at a lot of things, but they are very, everyone in the organization will look up and they will only do what their manager tells them to do. So the trick, so our people came back and said, we're not going to be able to make this work with the Danish people or the European people. They just cannot get the commitments of the resources that we need to make this work. Okay, that's a problem, fine. So we'll have to establish an executive relation to make this work. So we flew to India, sat down. I sat down with the founder and chairman of Huawei. He's a former general in the Chinese army. He doesn't speak a word of English, so it was an interesting discussion. But nevertheless, what we came back with when we flew back was top management sponsorship of this. They wanted to do this. They wanted to build the greatest cable network in the world. And they committed to doing that in 18 months, which is unheard of. But this guy has 70,000 people working in R&D. So even if he didn't have all the solutions, I trusted him. He could do that, and he could make that happen. And that's what we're doing now. All of that just to say, this is really the examples that we're trying to drive through. This is how we're trying to act as role models and fix the problems. We could have debated this forever, and we could have had a lot of slides telling us why we shouldn't be doing this. But this was the only way forward, so we took it. This is some of the agility that needs to seep into an organization if one is to deal with all of the challenges that we just talked about before. I think sort of summing up on the leadership side here is, of course, being a leader in this situation, there are a lot of similarities to being a leader anywhere at any point in time. A lot of the basic qualities of a leader are the same. But there are some tricks and techniques that you have to adapt. You have to sort of get out of your comfort zone. There is risk in some of these decisions, and you have to walk the furthest in order to show how we're going to work. I can't just put out a slide deck and say, so this is what you're going to go do, all of you, and then it's just going to happen. So as a leader, it falls on you, of course, to step out and to do it, to be the role model. What's important is that that does not mean that the executives will be making all decisions. Quite the opposite, actually, and that was the other point I just wanted to touch on here, which is to say on the left-hand side, you see a fairly classical way of developing products at any company. So first you do this, then you do that, and then you do that. That takes forever. That can take 2 or 3 years, depending on how complicated a process we're looking at. And you will not know whether you get it right or not until you get to the end and you do the actual live launch to hundreds and thousands of people. And if you didn't get it right, that's really, really bad news. So what we're doing now, and this is sort of an outcome of this new culture, this new way of leading, a new way of working, is we are introducing actually self-contained, self-managing teams that will be given a pot of money, some resources, and a job to do, and then they will be left alone, and they will do it. So the figuring out of how, there we need to engage the entire organization, because of course 8,000 people will be better at figuring this out than 1 or 10. Of course they will. And the other advantage of doing it this way in sprints, as it's called, it's 2 weeks. They work on one thing, then they step on to the next thing and the next thing. So you fail fast. And that's extremely important in a digital world. Because remember some of the graphs of how quickly things move, how quickly things ramp. If you're on to the wrong thing, you have to fail fast. And you have to be absolutely disciplined about killing the stuff that doesn't work. So you can't have your pet projects for months or years. It's not going to happen. You're not going to make it if you keep working like that. All right, I think we're coming to the end of what I wanted to say. Just one other point here on innovation. It doesn't have to be invented here. You can partner up with the best, integrate it in your own platforms, present it in a way that makes sense to your own customers, and get on with it. So not invented here doesn't work anymore. The final point I wanted to make was just jumping to you. So what does digitization mean for you? First of all, it means you're actually getting ready for jobs that don't even exist today. Some of them do, of course, but a lot of them don't, and we don't know what they're going to be yet. By the time you're 38, you will have had between 10 and 14 different jobs. You will have worked for between 10 and 14 different companies on average. The top 10 demands on jobs that we're seeing today didn't exist 6 years ago. I guess that's probably going to be the same in 4, 5, 6 years when you're out there. And 1 out of 4 employees today has been with their current employer for 1 year. That's actually just the same point. So what you need to get ready for and I'm sure you're already doing this, but in a digital world, you have to be extremely flexible, nimble, and you have to accept something which is quite significant. And that's the point, that you can't just train for a job and then know the trade and the tricks and then do that for the next 40 years. That's not going to work for you. You're going to have to keep educating yourself, reinventing yourself, and creating the jobs that you will do in the future. That, I think, is an excellent position to be in. Should we take some questions?
Thank you very much, Pernille, for an informative presentation you gave here. A lot of the questions we've received from the audience also involves around the core business model of TDC, as you have mentioned. And just to sum it up, I think I noticed your slide about with the top 5 market caps, large cap companies in the world. They were either content providers, hardware producers, or software producers.
Yes.
No telcos.
No telcos.
I was just wondering, TDC, or was it Københavns Telefonaktieselskab?
It used to be at some point, yes.
It's been around since 1879.
Yes.
Maybe you just won't realize that you're not a digital company, that you're actually just a utility company. Some utility companies provide water, some provide electricity, and some provide fiber and telephone cables.
Well, I think that's certainly one way of looking at it. And there is a school of thought out there that that's the way it's going to happen. Another way of looking at it is that we have a unique position in which to be, and that was one of the slides I actually didn't cover. But one of the things that people tell us, that our customers tell us, and actually that you demonstrated up front, Simon, is that sometimes technology is difficult, right? So sometimes you need someone to help you put together the right solutions, either for your business or for your home. So how do you navigate in an ever-expanding landscape of apps and services and cloud-based services, and maybe, particularly on the business side, how do you figure out how you also embed the right levels of security against some of the issues that are out there? So what every telco has these days is a very thorough, very deep understanding of how the products are used. So of course that gives us a lot of data, a lot of insight into what the customers are actually using, what they're looking for, what they're struggling with. And I'm not here to scare you, but I think you probably would be a little bit scared if I was to tell you how much we know about you. We know where you go. We know how long you stay in every location. We know what you watch when you stream things. We know who you talk to, so on and so forth. And of course, all of this is not data that we keep, but it's just to say there is a lot of digital footprints left out there by you and certainly by corporates. And pulling all of that together and making tailor-made solutions, that's where, of course, the place is going forward on top of the connectivity.
That was a good way of keeping a critical journalist down. Thank you. But still, moving on to this, when you say you're partnering up with Huawei, yes, that's a hardware producer.
And software, yes.
All right, but it seems like in the US we have a situation, it's largely the same, the telecom industry, does, but they have the same profit curves.
Absolutely.
AT&T is going for, they have made a bid on Time Warner, one of the largest media and content broadcasters. I was just wondering, do you think you and I could be colleagues along the future?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Are you serious? I mean,
yes,
would that be a way for TDC to buy TV2 or something like
Obviously, I couldn't comment on that particularly, but I think telcos generally, of course, and that includes TDC, have big entertainment businesses. So you see all the TV, all the music, all the content that we have there. Of course, we have a huge vested interest in the entertainment business. And of course, we will also in Europe see combinations of content providers and content distributors, because the content providers need to get their stuff out there and the content distributors need stuff to distribute. So of course, we'll see that convergence in Europe as well. I have no doubt about that.
Interesting. Also, another question about the history of TDC. Would you agree that more than 2 decades after the privatization of Tele Denmark, TDC, it has become into a rather conservative, maybe the question is conservative, boring company?
Well, I can tell you my life is not boring, but I think I know where the question is going. I think there was this notion that it used to be that TDC owned all these interesting companies in, be it Switzerland, be it some of the Arab countries, actually, would you believe it, and in some of our more neighboring countries, such as Lithuania and so on and so forth. I think that has all gone now. We are a Scandinavian-focused company, but we are also a company with a much bigger entertainment business than we used to be. 2 years ago, I bought a Norwegian cable company called Get, which is the leading entertainment company in Norway. So what we have now in Denmark and Norway is not only a telco communication business, but also, to your previous question, huge entertainment businesses. And those are certainly not boring. And then I guess the whole thing that one needs to get excited about here is this is the center of what everyone needs. Everyone needs to be connected. Everyone needs more connectivity, broader, faster, everywhere you go, so on and so forth. So there is a lot of technological innovation going on around how you can get more out of the spectrum that we have on the mobile side. That's the limited resource that we have. So how can you expand on that? How can you do better on that? So there is a lot of interesting stuff going on if you sort of want to be part of the industrial or the digital revolution, rather.
So to be absolutely sure, because people are also talking about how will you ensure the future of TDC, and your answer is it will be a vertical integration. The value chain must be intertwined.
Absolutely. I'm convinced that that needs to happen and will happen.
And it will be TDC as the acquirer?
Who knows? Who knows? What I said was I am sure that the convergence will happen. I am sure that the combination not only of mobile and fixed, which used to be what people were talking about, but also the combination of content production and distribution power, that will happen.
Okay. Then let's talk a bit about the telecom industry as such. The most popular question right now is TDCs are losing customers in all areas except for mobile. The source is apparently an article from November 2nd. I
it's our earnings release, yes.
Oh, that must be correct.
It must be correct, and it's our own numbers, yeah.
So, are you? I mean, the 4 largest telco operators in Denmark. Are you battling for market share, and TDC are losing?
No, we're not. And we're not so much battling against the local competitors here. We're actually battling more with the global giants, one of the slides I showed you there. So you all watch Westworld on HBO, you all watched House of Cards on Netflix and so on. That's actually the real battle. So it's on the content side, which is also why I'm convinced the convergence will happen. It's less sort of a fight locally between the other telco players. That's, of course, the headlines that somehow always end up in the newspapers because it's relatively easy and tangible. But the big fight, if you think about it, is actually sort of local players also on the content side. Now, of course, TV2 is somewhat protected by its ownership structure, but there are also privately owned content producers out there who produce local content here in Scandinavia. They are in for a life and death battle against the big global giants. So will we all just be watching US-produced content 3, 4, 5 years from now? Or will it be possible to sustain a local industry around content production as well? And again, I think here part of that answer lies in how we team up and how we take that forward in that battle.
But in a relatively small area as Denmark, and even in the Nordics, do you think that the answer to some of the short-term problems would be to have larger telcos? I mean,
it could well
merging.
be. Unfortunately, we in Denmark have fostered a commissioner of competition who now sits in Brussels, and as you know, she does not agree with me on that one. So we'll see. We'll see how that moves forward. Attempts have been made of consolidating companies also in Denmark, and those have been declined by the EU. So far it has not been possible to to consolidate the way that people would like to do within the industry.
So what you're saying that Margrethe Vestager shouldn't be worried about competition issues?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying what I am saying is there is, and you know this, there is a correlation between profit levels and investment levels. And if we all want better networks, more capacity, more speed, that means someone has to invest more, and that also means we have to allow someone to make some money. You can't invest the money that you don't make. Now, right now, I've taken a bet of increasing investments quite significantly on the network side in TDC, and then believing that we can make the profitability grow as well. But it's a huge bet. And of course, at some point in time, profitability has to come up. That can happen partly through consolidation. So if the politicians mean what they say, they want more investments, they're going to have to allow what they have allowed in the US, bigger entities and more profitable entities. Otherwise, the bank accounts will dry up, simply put.
So also there's a question, it's sort of the same theme here. People are very worried about you.
Thank you.
The question is, give me some arguments why TDC won't be one more Nokia and fail to innovate and even survive. Can I just rephrase that to what are the biggest risk for TDC? You've already said that part of the solution is the vertical integration.
Investments.
And investments.
Yep.
So the biggest risk, would that be?
Well, the biggest risk, of course, is that this big bet that we're taking, that I'm taking, will not pay off. So that even if we are now investing billions and billions in building better networks, that somehow we will not be able to monetize that. Because that is then the end of the road. That will lead to a very different structure in the telecom market in Denmark, and that will lead to significantly lower investment levels, which I don't think any of us want. So having said that, there is a lot of things we can do and are doing, and a lot of very important trends that we actually have reversed now and are beginning to see reversed. So we are cautiously optimistic about the future of TDC. But nice to know that you're concerned.
Could you try, there's some questions about the fact that you're a female top executive.
So the question is whether...
Do you think about that? I don't know
I'm
what
just kidding.
It was more, but it was something like, do you, Pernille, noticed in your everyday life that you are the only female among the CEOs of C20 large cap companies?
In my everyday life, no. Because in my everyday life I spent with investors, with my colleagues at TDC, and in the executive team at TDC we're 8 people. 3 of us are female, so I'm not in that context alone. And of course it's been very important for me as I have put together the team, the executive team in TDC, which I've done over the past 18 months. It's been very important for me to put diversity in there. And certainly gender is one part of that. I've also looked at age. I have 2 top executives in TDC now, part of the top executive team, which are just above 30 years old. One of them, a female, is currently on maternity leave. We brought in people from outside of Denmark into the executive team. And so the whole concept of diversity, of course, is one that is hugely important for us as for any other company these days. Having said that, of course, there are situations where it occurs to me that there are not a lot of other females in the room. So before I did the CEO job, I did the group CFO job for 5-6 years at TDC. And in that capacity, of course, you get to travel around the world, meet investors, meet analysts, meet sort of the financial communities. And I think during those 6 years, I can probably count on 10 fingers the number of times during those 7 years where there were other female executives in the room. So it is a man's world still. But in my everyday life, it's not something I spend a lot of time worrying about or thinking about in my own situation. I do worry about how we can promote more people, more female leaders within our company, something that is inherently tricky in a tech world, because a lot of tech guys are guys. So sort of getting more female talent in there and making females thrive in a tech world is something I worry about quite a lot.
Could you give a few solutions to that issue?
Actually, I would love solutions, but I can tell you some of the things we're trying to do. One of the things we've done is we have decided to award or to financially encourage that the fathers, the males, the male employees also take leave when they have children. So we have a program, it's called Fars Kram, where the young men are sort of supported. We supply full salary for a certain period of time to encourage them to also take out time to be with their babies. So it's not just the mother who stays at home, because I do think, and it's also been my own experience, that there is a fairly equal situation amongst men and women up until that crucial point where there is a baby. Then things change. So we put in a lot of effort in also making sure that we have ways of getting the females back to work, getting the women back to work once they have been out. Because if you're out for 6, 9, 12 months, a lot of things will change. And usually you need perhaps a little bit of help to catch up once you're back. So those are some of the things we've done. They haven't solved everything. So any input is very, very welcome. This is a tough one, a very difficult one.
Do you have any idea why S&P 500 companies in the US actually have a much rather share of female women as CEOs than in Denmark?
Denmark is actually doing very, very poorly. Even compared to Sweden and Norway, and even just in a European context, we're doing very, very poorly. We know that, of course, some of the countries around us have sort of put in hard numbers to say, in Norway, for instance, 40% of your leadership team have to be women. Of course, that works. Question is that the way you want it to work? But of course, it will get you there, numbers-wise. And then I think also maybe we've gotten a little bit lazy in Denmark. We're not really discussing it a lot anymore. It's sort of a thing of the past. Except it's not. It's very real. It will become very real for some of you.
Good. This is not a question about gender. This is a question about how you got to the top of a large company as TDC. Tips, advices, tell your story. Maybe were there some key decisions in your career path to...
It's a good question. I think, first of all, part of it is about, do you really, really want it? Because you are going to, of course, have to work a lot. It's fun, but you are going to have to work a lot. So I think part of it is, do you really, really want it? And then I think also part of it is, make sure that you fundamentally do something that you think is fun. So whether that's TDC, hopefully it is for many of you, whether it's something else, but make sure you do something that you really like doing. Because often we are best at what we think is fun. So my personal rule is 4 out of 5 days a week, I have to look forward to go to work. And when I go home, I have to think, that was a good day. So in other words, there will be days that are not great. That's part of the job. They're tough decisions, difficult discussions. But it has to fundamentally be fun. It has to be something you want to do. And you have to be surrounded by people that you like working with. And then, yes, pick your partners wisely, but also pick your bosses wisely. So don't think that you don't decide who your boss is. Of course you do. You can always change. And you in here are very privileged young people, well educated, sought after. Companies will really want to employ you. Make sure that you also make a choice, that you're not just flattered by someone wanting to employ you. Of course we all want to employ you, but you should look for places where you can actually learn something, where there is a boss that you look at and you think, I can learn something from him or her. And then maybe that will last a year or two, and then you need to move on to something else. But the most important professional relationship you will have in your life is with your boss. So make sure you choose as wisely as in your personal lives when you hit the bar in a few minutes.
We have a few, just 1 or 2 questions.
Question up there as well.
Oh, great.
Hi, my name is Ivana, and online also is Bright Minds. Oh, thanks. I work for Aarhus Symposium, so one of the industry groups. So my question is regarding, I think I'm really impressed with your sprinting system, and you talk a lot about agility because I really don't do it. It's not an option. there's also, I think, kind of the dark side of agility, which is really going on strategy and doing too many things at the same time and really failing to prioritize. So how do you guys work with that?
That's a very, very good question. And I actually think part of agility is getting your priorities right. So if you get your priorities right, that will answer a lot. Because then you will not be doing this and you will not be doing that unless it is on your list of priorities. So we've spent a lot of time discussing, is this more important than that? Should we be doing all sorts of fancy stuff and so on and so forth? And we've sort of come down to the list I just briefly showed you up there. And then we have decided on, in our case, 2 guiding principles or dogmas. Whatever we do, we have to, when we do something, it has to come out on the other side simpler, and that's simpler for the customer, simpler for us, because this is all complicated stuff. So to the extent we can simplify using some of these solutions, that's always good. So it has to be simpler, it has to be better. So if you're not meeting that, and if you can't explain why you need resources to do something that doesn't make it simpler or better, and that is not within sort of the list of priorities, then there are no resources. And of course, in reality, it's not that simple. But I think a lot comes from being straight on priorities and from them then sticking to those priorities also when it gets tough. So that your people see that you actually walk the talk. So we said this was going to be important for us, so we're not going to be doing that. One example, we said that whenever we launch a new product, we will do it for the online channel first, and we will do it for the mobile first. So when someone then comes in and says, so now we want to launch this, and we look at the launch plan and we say, but where's the online solution? Oh, we're going to get to that later. Nope, you're not going to launch. Go back, redo. So you also have to be very, very tough on living that, because otherwise it will explode.
So, yeah, Pernille, could you be specific about your career path again? Because you spent your whole career dealing with raw numbers,
yes.
Accountant, and you were in the treasury department and CFO.
Yep.
So how did you acquire the managing skills for being a CEO and delivering such a presentation with
well, believe it or not,
numbers?
even the sharpest finance people in TDC requires a little bit of management as well. So there is a lot of management and a lot of leadership in, of course, being at the front of the finance department. And of course, CFOs these days, and you will probably know this, CFO these days are a lot of different things. So you will find perhaps the, let's call them old school, classical CFO who's more sort of within the spreadsheets and more on that. And you will find the more sort of, in a way, annoying CFOs. I was certainly an annoying CFO because I would put my nose in everything. So if I saw something I didn't understand, I would sort of stick to that and keep asking questions, keep pushing, but the numbers are showing me, so what's going on? Why are we doing this in the business? So you can take, the great thing about a CFO job is you can take it in many directions. And of course, as you become more experienced in whatever you do, you will have the opportunity to broaden out what you do. But as a CFO, you sit in on everything, you know everything that's going on, you have all the numbers, you have the perfect opportunity to start making your mark also on the business side of things. And then it's about taking the jump, ultimately.
Great. I'm sorry, I've been told we need to cut off this session 5 minutes before time. So, Pernille Erenbjerg, just thank you so much for giving you your digital power to...
Thank you.
And thank you, Simon, as well, for moderating the session. And for all of you, the winner of the Aarhus Symposium Award 2016 will be announced in the Accenture Auditorium in just a few minutes. So please go there and enter the balconies where there will be room for you. Thank you.